At the time of writing, the last week has seen several viral videos of women being attacked or otherwise harassed in public, gaining large amounts of traction online. Dragging behind that traction like a deer under an 18-wheeler has been the conversation about said videos. This conversation specifically has devolved into a debate about protecting women and other people in public in general, and whether or not people have any responsibility to help each other when they see each other in distress. This video will kind of address that, but it's not really the focus. For the most part, I want to interrogate what that phrase, protect women, even means. Because not everyone saying protect women is saying the same thing or means the same methods. So let's get into that. Let me tell you a story. On September 3rd, 2023, a black woman named Bash was approached by a man who asked for her number. After she rejected his advances, the man assaulted her, hitting her in the head with a brick, while several onlookers stood by and watched. In another event, an elderly woman was attacked on a train while onlookers did nothing. Both of these came a few weeks after the famed Montgomery Brawl, where multiple people came to the defense of a black man being attacked by several white men. When Miss Bash pointed out that many men around her did nothing to help, this became a massive issue online, with men who weren't even there feeling the need to explain why they believed that a woman being bashed in the head with a brick is 1. Not their fault, 2. Not their problem, and 3. Also actually her fault for some reason. One man felt the need to call her a troublemaker and imply that that's why she wasn't helped. And 2 things were pointed out in response. 1, that's the exact logic that racists and police sympathizers use when black men are killed by cops. Trayvon smoked weed once, so he was no angel and he deserved it, or he did X in an unrelated incident years ago, so he deserved it. Bringing up a victim's entirely unrelated past to justify the harm they've suffered is a tactic literally used against black men, so for them to use that against a black woman is extremely frustrating. 2, her attack had nothing to do with anything she had done in a previous video. She wasn't filming a skit, she wasn't harassing anyone, and she wasn't causing problems. She was approached and rejected someone's advances, and he decided she deserved to be hit with a brick because of it. He was a violent, misogynistic, and evil person. It's a situation entirely separate from those past videos, which this random man has probably never seen. And 3, he actually doesn't know her and isn't even from the same city. Even attempting to justify what was done to this woman is insane. It literally does not make sense. You don't even have to like her statements made afterward, but that doesn't make this situation her fault. Not that she said anything wrong either, nor should you expect a perfect academic analysis of a situation from someone still recovering from its immediate occurrence. The other response from men was to admit that what happened to her was wrong, but then to reject that any bystanders had any inherent obligation to act. The logic provided by many being that I don't have to protect women I'm not with or related to. And it's this impulse that I want to explore and challenge. Let's talk about objectification for a second. I'm going to run on the assumption that everyone here has a pre-existing familiarity with this topic, so to be simple, objectification is when a person is rendered or treated as an object. Their humanity and their rights and empathy and respect that they are owed as such is denied, while their usefulness or utility to the objectifier is highlighted. Objectification can be centered around reducing someone to their looks or body, or to a task or to a job or utility. The objectified person has no emotions, no boundaries, no voice, and no autonomy. This doesn't necessarily just mean women. The slave is an objectified subject. They are rendered a non-human object for use and control by the enslaver. The other, or the scapegoat, is an objectified subject. Humanity and autonomy denied in favor of the political tool they represent. The objectified is often debated, but their voice in this debate is the least relevant one. Why am I making this point? I'm not seeking to imply that the men who say things like I only protect women I'm related to are all misogynist objectifying women in their life, but there's definitely an element of that to some of this, right? It's not a secret that many men consider women property. We've all been in high school and heard the edgy jokes that no one wants to admit have a bit of truth to them. Christian patriarchy is very open about wives needing to submit to their husbands and men ruling the household, and that has its roots in the practice of women being objects literally bought and sold. Half of our wedding traditions are nods to this fact, so the ownership of women, even played out in mere metaphorical sense, is an aspect of our society and our attitudes toward women. In the book White Evangelical Racism, author Anthea Butler discusses the biblical roots of modern-day American racism and traces its historical progression through the slavery period, the antebellum South, and beyond. It is in her discussion of the latter that she says this: white Southern women were not mere bystanders. They came to serve as an important cornerstone of the lost cause religion. The purity, innocence, and respectability that Southern womanhood evoked for white men were an essential part of the social apparatus and logic that kept black men and women in subjugation and fear. As a symbol of the racist South, white Southern women provided order through their domestic lives and their bodies. The practices of religiosity, respectability, and homemaking that they cultivated reflected a genteel morality and emphasized the sacredness of a particular type of family life and structure. These women, existing virtually on a pedestal, were seen as the virginal ideal of home and hearth. This image was juxtaposed with stereotypes of freed black women who were considered sexually promiscuous, impure, and not in need of protection. Black men were understood to be dangerous brutes and rapists, essentially uncontrollable. These racist tropes were used not only to continue to subject the newly freed to danger and ridicule, but also to promote violence as a way to maintain order and protect white womanhood. The process observed here is a form of objectification. During this period, the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this deified image of white women as the pinnacle of Southern morality and purity had two functions. It kept white women in line and subjugated two white men, and provided a basis for subjugating black people. Sexual assault frame-ups against black men were common, with reasons for lynchings being anything from literally looking at white women or insulting one to sexual assaults that were almost entirely fabricated. While white women were nominally the just cause of this violence aimed at protecting women, even when they objected, they were not heard. White anti-lynching activists faced violent threats, and when white women objected to being used for sexual assault frame-ups, their confessions of lying or insistence on the victim's innocence would be ignored. Although the majority of lynchings did not even involve the accusation of sexual assault, the racist cry of rape became a popular explanation, which was far more effective than either of the two previous attempts to justify mob attacks on black people. In a society where male supremacy was all-pervasive, men who were motivated by their duty to defend their women could be excused of any excesses they might commit. That their motive was sublime was ample justification for the resulting barbarities. The protection these men were offering was a hollow one. These women were not safe from domestic violence or sexual assault from their husbands and fathers, nor were they under any particular elevated threat of assault from black people. In fact, we know now that most sexual assault and abuse victims are victims of people they know, not strangers. Family members, friends, teachers, pastors, people who already have a level of trust and social clout that they can lean on to abuse with no accountability. What these men were protecting wasn't women, but rather their sole sexual access to these women. Their impulse to defend was not directed toward a person, but an object they possess and covet. Not only that, but this protection they provided was conditional. Women who didn't conform to these Southern white standards were not included in the protect category. I think that many times today when people, including black men, talk about protecting women, they are doing something similar, where they don't mean protecting women as fully human, autonomous political actors deserving of safety and solidarity. They mean protecting women they own or possess. But if you say things like, we need to protect women, and you don't include in that statement protecting not just their physical safety, but civil rights, political rights, bodily autonomy, etc., you don't actually want to protect anyone. Protecting women means backing them up when they advocate for themselves. It means having an understanding of misogyny. You say protect women, but when you notice a woman who's speaking be interrupted by a man, do you stop him so she can continue? Do you defend her political autonomy, her right to participation in political action and processes? Protecting women doesn't just mean physically protecting women, and it doesn't ever mean securing your sole sexual access to a woman. Men conflate having sole sexual access to a woman to her being safe, and it's not. I think we see this a lot when situations like a black woman being abused by a white man happen, and other black people respond with, well, that's what she gets for dating outside the race. Like this woman is no longer entitled to solidarity for abuse she suffers because she didn't keep herself solely sexually accessible to black men. And on the flip side, you often see black women shame other black women when the abuser is a black man, saying that that's what they get for dating within the race. And both of these people are misogynists, enabling violence against women. Neither of them care at all about women. The former is enabling abuse of black women by victim blaming them for who they choose to date, allowing abusers of their own race to remain covert and therefore abuse more easily. The latter is doing the same thing, victim blaming black women for dating black men and thus making it easier for white abusers to get away with abusing, which already is not difficult for them most of the time. On top of that, they're often painting all black men as mindless, idiotic, violent savages and white men as civilized saviors. Ultimately, in both cases, these people are misogynists, and in both cases, they are intentionally wielding the violence a woman is experiencing as a political tool to express control over other women, or especially in the case of the second, further a racist political agenda. I think you see something very similar with TERFs, where there is little to no actual safety for women in TERF spaces, especially for gender non-conforming and queer women. But the political tool that presenting it as such provides is the real focus. TERFs will say protect women and then mace a cis woman in the bathroom, or sexually harass or even assault her because they assume she's trans. Not even to mention the stories of TERFs committing acts that would be nakedly considered sexual assault if a man did them, but justifying their sexual violence as in defense of women. The other important aspect of this whole situation to look at is the functionalism of male violence. Functionalism is basically the practice of examining the purpose a certain behavior or institution has or serves. For example, say the police attack a bunch of peaceful protesters for whatever reason they come up with. Maybe people are being unruly or just saying things they don't like. Either way, in the process of taking control of a situation, maybe they beat several people who aren't part of the protest or who aren't doing anything wrong necessarily. A functionalist might look at this instance of police violence and say that this instance is not an outlier or the police making a mistake or choosing the wrong person to hit, but is the system functioning as intended. The police beating this person might not on paper be right, but it still serves the purpose of helping the police establish and maintain authority in a given area. Whether or not the person deserved it or not isn't important. It's whether or not the violence has achieved its function. Violent cops then get off not just because cops protect their own, but because in the eyes of the system they literally haven't done wrong. The goal was never to only attack the deserving, it was to violently reimpose statist order in this area via violence and intimidation. The fact that poor black and brown communities are the most impacted by drug issues is not a fluke or a random mistake, but is an intentional function of the system. There's some kind of benefit being reaped to that aspect of the system's behavior. To quote Angela Davis discussing slavery again, slavery relied as much on routine sexual abuse as it relied on the whip or the lash. Excessive sex urges, whether they existed among individual white men or not, had nothing to do with this virtual institutionalization of rape. Sexual coercion was rather an essential dimension of the social relations between slave master and slave. In other words, the right claimed by slave owners and their agents over the bodies of female slaves was a direct expression of their presumed property rights over black people as a whole. The license to rape emanated from and facilitated the ruthless economic domination that was the gruesome hallmark of slavery. The pattern of institutionalized sexual abuse of black women became so powerful that it managed to survive the abolition of slavery. Group rape, perpetuated by the Ku Klux Klan and other terrorist organizations of the post-Civil War period, became an uncamouflaged political weapon in the drive to thwart the movement for black equality. Davis is talking about racism and misogyny here, but misogynistic violence in general is a lot like this. The man who attacked Miss Bash did so because he was denied sexual access to her. She turned him down. Therefore, the violence he commits after is an act of revenge for the embarrassment he feels, but also is an act in the name of patriarchy, punishing this woman for not making herself sexually available to him. It is an act that serves to express power and domination in our wider society, and in that immediate moment. The functionalist narrative of this violence is that it further intimidates women into giving him what he wants. How many women would have given him their number, even if they had no interest, simply because they fear what he would have done? This is also why many men don't interfere in these situations. They know that because men like this exist, it is easier for them to do the bare minimum and get laid. It is easier for them to commit softer acts of abuse and not be held accountable. On top of that, they benefit from women assuming they're one of the bad ones and capitulating to them immediately because of that. Men rely on the ambient threat of misogynistic terror to softly influence the choices of women around them in their favor. Because no one intervened, that neighborhood is now that much more dangerous. Abusive men have seen what happened to Bash as allowing them to commit violence. It would have been that much safer instead if he'd gotten his ass beat for what he did, if we're being honest. And the message sent was that the hood didn't tolerate that behavior, that it wouldn't abide that behavior. With all that said though, there are likely those in the audience going, yeah, that's all true, but it still isn't my responsibility to step in when I see a woman being victimized in public. And yes, you are 100% right. You have no inherent moral responsibility to do anything. You don't have to, and those situations can be scary. I've been in them firsthand multiple times, and I've still made the choice to step in, whether it's in public for random people or for people I know. And the reason why is because I sincerely hope and pray to any God that exists, that if my mother or my sister or my friends who are women or queer or people of color or whoever was being attacked in public, that someone would have the courage and empathy to step in and protect them. I pray that if I were ever desperate, homeless, abused, or assaulted, or just needing help desperately, that someone would have the kindness to reach out a hand and help a stranger. And also, I legitimately don't want to know what it would feel like to live with yourself after watching a situation like this unfold in front of you and doing nothing. And here's the important part. No one has to intervene in these situations alone. If multiple people do, it becomes safer for all of them to continue interfering. Yeah, if one dude says something, it's harder and scarier, but no one should have to confront these people alone. Femicide, or the murder of females in this context meaning women, including trans women, is a massive threat, especially for Black women. Black women and Indigenous women are the primary victims of femicide and sex trafficking. Most victims of these crimes, and other violent crimes such as sexual assault, are victimized by people they know, but even in that case, people's unwillingness to step in will enable abuse to occur. I know a lot of people don't look at this as a political situation, but I urge you to do so. The decision to victim blame this woman for being attacked is political. The conflation of protection with domination and control is political. When someone says protect women, that is a political statement, and how they define that is a window into their politics. There is no such thing as an apolitical misogyny. The very choice to be misogynistic is a political statement about how you value women and how you think they should be treated. It isn't a jump to go from harassing women and hitting women who reject me is okay, to women don't deserve rights, autonomy, or personhood. In fact, those are literally the same statement. It's less a jump and more the quiet part out loud.
Protecting women is something I've thought a lot about, especially the call to protect Black women, because Black women have historically been so unprotected. I have studied Black history and Black women's history in the context of the US and the Caribbean, and I've also moved through the world as a Black woman. And people treat Black women like we're nothing or like we're God. We cannot be humans who make mistakes or need help, because then we're confirming stereotypes or we're falling short of the expectation that Black women are going to save everyone. Specifically with regards to education, I have been very privileged in my life, but I have still felt so powerless and vulnerable because of how I personally have been treated and because of the history I have studied and the ways I see people today take any opportunity to rationalize the harms Black women experience. There are men who throw around phrases like protecting women or respecting women when they're only interested in what they can gain from using those phrases, which is usually praise and attention from the women they want to attract. There are men for whom protecting women means telling women what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, what they can and can't wear. These are controlling behaviors, not protection. And these men will act like what they're saying is common sense and not an admission that there are men who make the world dangerous for women and people of other marginalized genders, and men who disagree with them. Many of these men trying to blame women for the violence they have suffered at the hands of men are scared of men too. And if they would just say that, instead of getting upset when women do not trust men, maybe we could start finding some solutions. I think protecting women looks like doing the work to make the world safer for women, even when it's hard. And when the women whose praise and attention you want aren't around. Because if you're only speaking up when I'm around and you want me to clap for you, you don't actually have a problem being around people who behave in ways that are harmful. You just want to be told what a good progressive woman protector you are. So addressing the material conditions of women in your communities when you have the means and relationship with them to do so, organizing around issues that affect women, and being very thoughtful about the behavior you will tolerate from the men you're in community with are things that I think help to protect women.
So usually when I hear the phrase protect women, usually when we hear that, we think of, oh, if you see a woman being mistreated out in public, you basically defend her. You basically stand up for her. But I personally think protect women goes way deeper than that. Because let's be fucking for real, women are very much unprotected everywhere they go. Like in real life, like, you know, at the club, at the bar, even at a fucking museum, but also on the internet, especially when it comes to dating apps, because of the kinds of horror stories that I have heard about women having negative experiences with men that they've met through, like, you know, Hinge or Tinder. Is very baffling. So with me personally, what I think protect women is that you need to be here and protect all women. You need to be standing here and standing up for all of them, regardless of race, body type, hair type, whatever, any of that. Because I notice when it comes to protect women, somebody has said something about y'all are all for protecting women that you only find attractive. And I was like, oh, most definitely. A lot of dudes only do that shit because they find the woman attractive. Like if they see a woman out in public being harassed, like at a party or something by a dude, oftentimes a man would step in simply because he's like trying to get that other woman's attention and he wants that other dude to leave her alone. But if that woman was like a plain Jane, basically somebody that he didn't find attractive, he most likely would not have done that. That's why when I hear the phrase protect women, it's just like, yeah, y'all are all for protecting women until they don't fit like your status of attractiveness. Like, yeah, I do think you need to stand up for them when they're being harassed by other men and that of the sort. It's much more than just protect women. I'm like, okay, but what actually does that mean? And I was like, well, you need to stand up for all of them, not just the ones that you find attractive.
What protecting women to me looks like is, especially as a trans woman, I feel like it's just intervening before things escalate. Simply speaking up, defusing situations, not allowing things to get physical. Like, it shouldn't have to be when someone's in someone's face, that's when someone decides to stick up and say something. When you see someone being hostile, especially a cis man, that's this time when it is to step in and to speak up. And it's commonly not done. It's usually when it's too late. You know, when you reference even just the recent situation with Roe, who was hit with the brick, the fact that it even escalated to the point where the man grabbed a brick and threatened her with the brick and no one did nothing. And for her to still get hit and they all still standing idly by, just useless. That's just too common. And in the reality is, like, we need more people who are willing to identify the signs of a man, especially a cis man, being hostile when things easily can get volatile. We know how these men move. So truly, it shouldn't only be physical protection. It should be verbal protection, because there's verbal harassment. And a lot of men don't step in when there's verbal harassment, and they don't really see the significance in verbal harassment.
How often do you feel unsafe around men in public?
I'm gonna be honest, I feel extremely unsafe around a lot of men in public. It's part of the reason why I don't like to go places by myself in general. And I remember when I used to work on set, like when I used to like work on movies and shit like that, like as an extra, I would be super scared on the way like back home, because sometimes I would have to stop and go get gas, or I'd stop to the store to like get myself something to eat, and I'd literally just be worried about there being some man in the damn parking lot like bothering me, because oftentimes that was the case. I literally would have men randomly walk up to me, try to talk to me, try to ask me for money, especially because I remember one time I was even stopping to get gas on the way to work, and mind you, it was a really cold day that this shit happened. I was basically just filling up my car to, you know, go to work. This man came up to me and he was like, hey, I can help you out with this, yada, yada, yada. And I was just like, I'm good. And I noticed that he like started walking over towards me. So while my car is like, you know, getting the gas put in there, I just jump inside my car and just sit there. And he's just standing there staring at me through the windshield. And I'm just looking at him and I'm just like, can you go? Because the gas stopped. And mind you, I needed to go ahead and get on the way to work. So I was about to be late. And he just literally stood there and stared at me for like 2 minutes. And then he finally left and walked away. And that's not the only occasion where things like this have happened. I've been followed by men in the stores. I have had men hit on me in the middle of me trying to just buy stuff and get my groceries or whatever the fuck I need. It's frustrating. Like literally with this new group that I am a part of called the Waifu House, we basically are focusing on, you know, making sure women feel safe, especially with this one event that we're going to be at. Our job is to make sure all the women feel all right, because we understand that we want to go out. We want to go out and dance and have fun and have a good time. But it's so freaking annoying how we can't basically do much of anything because we got to deal with some man creeping up on us.
Now, as far as when it comes to how often do I feel unsafe around men in public, well, I'm a trans woman, especially a black trans woman, so it's just all the fucking time. I'm forced to feel like I have to be presentable, I have to be, you know, not just presentable, but that means for me, presentable as a trans woman, it means I have to look cis passing, I better be looking great, hair better be done, outfit done, everything, so just for me to already not be identified as trans, but then I have to deal with people assuming I'm cis, which in itself, like, yeah, it's safer for a trans person to be assumed to be cis, but then I deal with just like the basic misogyny. I'm in a mostly white area, and I deal with a lot of white men who don't know how to approach women of color, especially black women, and it's in these weird fetishizing ways. And I've had times where me rejecting them, and, you know, my rightfully, you know, way, whether it's, we don't have to be nice with rejection or whatnot, but even just the most mildly type of rejection has turned into some just like ignorant type of responses. And truly, like, I don't feel safe. I literally do not feel safe going drinking. I have to friend zone men all the time, especially as a trans woman, because I don't know how these men are going to react to me. I don't know how they're going to react when they find out that I'm a trans woman, or especially a trans woman with my genitalia that I have. It's very scary just to walk into this life just being identified as cis. So it's scary being a trans person, and it's scary to be a cis woman. It's scary when you're walking between the lines of having the eyes of men that are into cis women, and I'm dealing with that very unique experience as a trans woman that's a cis passing, where like I said, like, men, you know, they confront me, they come at me, and in the most weirdest, most uncomfortable ways, and I'm always having to find a way to navigate myself out of that. So even when a man is being friendly, I feel nervous because I don't know, like, there's a lot of men that posture themselves as, you know, a nice guy, but when it comes down to it, like, it's just cosplaying it, and yeah, I don't know what to expect. So I live with the fear of men, one, coming at me for being a trans woman visibly, and but luckily, like, I don't typically deal with that at all. I haven't dealt that within my life as a trans woman. Like I said, I'm mostly cis passing, but definitely when it comes to my overall experience with men, it hasn't been a positive. It has always been conditional, and I definitely never have felt safe around men.
If I'm with other women and queer people around men in public, I usually feel safe enough. If I'm alone in public around men, definitely less safe. It's upsetting, but maybe the answer to this question, when I'm not surrounded by trusted people who understand me and share my core beliefs, is that I almost always feel unsafe around men. What makes you feel protected/held by your community or your people?
Now, as far as what makes me feel protected is other femmes and women and queer folks that are intersectional. Like, they are the ones that have stepped up, they've spoke out. I've had more women speak up for me, stand up for me, shoo away men, get men away, get me home safe when I'm too drunk. Literally recently I've had where I threw up at a bar because I saw someone I didn't want to see, and literally instantly, like immediately, like friend of mine, she immediately got me a taxi, she held me as I fucking threw up, and she made sure I got home safe, and she got in the taxi with me, and they drove us to my place, and she walked me in my house and made sure I made it to my room. It's constantly women of color, especially women of color, that have really looked out for me, made sure my well-being, making sure like, hey girl, like you've had 2 drinks, do not go for a third. I want to make sure you are okay. Like there's just so many ways I have seen specifically women of color just really show out and be there for me and really try to like, because again, like I haven't had many men stick up for me, especially as a black woman in the mostly white space. It has been the women of color here who have spoken up, who's literally shouted down at men, who's told them to get the hell away from me, to tell them to back off, to give me space. So that is like honestly has been my safety experience. That's when I feel protected, because at the end of the day, like men only protect what they possess, so they're not innately protectors.
Conversations. Discussing boundaries before an event or outing so we can keep each other safe. For the people I choose to share different parts of my identity with, I think that helps them to contextualize why I have some of the preferences I do and why I make some of the decisions I do. And if they choose to share pieces of themselves with me, I can do the same for them. Different people have different feelings about catcalling. I know there are people who will laugh it off or see it as a compliment. I'm not saying don't compliment people. You look nice today, or you look so good, or even a compliment on a specific feature or something from someone who understands me and does it in a way that doesn't make me feel objectified can go a long way. I love a compliment, I love praise. But men I don't know stopping me to demand my number or comment on my body, and men online justifying violence against women who said no on platforms where that kind of rhetoric gets enormous amounts of traction, those things do not make me feel held and protected. And I think more men need to be honest with themselves about whether they care if women feel held and protected. Men are not inherently the problem. Patriarchy is the problem, and anyone can reinforce harmful systems. But those with power and privilege and advantages ought to recognize that and ought to do what they can to change things.
I hate to say this, but I notice usually I wouldn't have issues with men bothering me if I have another man there with me. Because I notice, like I said, at MomoCon, when I'm with my men friends and my male presenting friends, I notice that dudes most likely leave me alone. But if I'm just walking around by myself or I'm walking around with my girlfriends or like my feminine presenting friends, I notice that men will literally bother all of us. And we're just like, can we stop? Can we not do that? I know a lot of women were talking about how they like legit don't go anywhere by themselves because of how creepy men are, and I get it completely. There are certain times where I legit won't go to places by myself because I don't know how I'm gonna feel being there. Like if I go to a convention and I know a lot of people that I know are gonna be there, I most definitely feel safe because I know I'll have somebody there to be with me just in case somebody starts to bother me. But it's another thing when I go to places by myself and I have to figure out on my own how to deal with these people in these situations. That's why I carry around pepper spray. I carry around like a few small weapons and whatnot just in case. And I hate the fact that I have to do that because I really shouldn't. Like, do you not think it's weird that we have to carry around self-defense? Like, shit. Like, do y'all not find that weird? If people weren't so fucking insane, we wouldn't have that issue. And also, when it comes to being protected by the community, I think when we have these parties and, a man starts bothering a woman in there, why don't y'all get rid of him? Why don't y'all ban him? Why don't y'all kick him out? When we say protect women in the community, that also goes for that too. Because I notice a lot of these people be like, oh, we don't want to kick out that guy because he contributes a lot of money to this event. He does so much for this event. He does this and then the third. Baby, I don't care. He's literally bothering women. He's literally making people feel uncomfortable. Do you really want your entire thing to have such a horrible reputation? Because you just keep letting this irritating person come in and bother the other clientele that you have. I notice sometimes when it comes to like community and when it comes to protection and whatnot, when money gets in the way, that's when they start thinking things differently. And I'm like, no, if we want to do better about being protective of women and feminine presenting people within our community, we need to finally, actually do more when it comes to these situations. It's more than being like, hey, stop doing that. It's like, yeah, you can't come back into this establishment because you keep bothering people. And I also think it's important to have more people at these events and whatnot that their like sole focus is to make sure like the women and the feminine presenting people are safe and okay. Because that's why I like deeply appreciate the Waifu House, because that's literally what the entire brand is about. But I wish we would have more things like this, because it would make a lot of people like enjoy going out a lot more. Because I noticed a lot of people were talking about they don't like going out because they know they're going to be bothered by like some guy or whatever. And I get that. But we should all be able to enjoy things. We should be able to enjoy like the fun things about the world. It shouldn't be like feeling like we're stuck in our houses and not being able to do anything, because when we go out, there's gonna be somebody bothering us.
Discussing this kind of violence can be very difficult and traumatic, especially for those of us of any gender or orientation who have been harassed or subjected to hate crimes in public or assaulted. It is critical that people who are victims in these situations band together and support each other. It's one thing to hold a gun in my hand and tell you to stand behind me. It's another to put one in your hand and stand beside you. I think that the establishment of community groups and organizations with the capacity to commit self-defensive violence on behalf of victims of assault is essential. People should form self-defense groups not just in the sense of teaching people to defend themselves, but actively defending them. If a man harassing and beating women in the street is political action, specifically misogynistic and fascistic political action, then there must be a contra-political action in response. Beating the men who do these things would be more effective of a political statement than almost anything else. Men who commit these acts of violence must be made to feel afraid, terrified of constant retribution on behalf of victims. People who are jailed for committing acts of violence against their abusers must be supported. We should advocate for their release and also advocate for supporting them while they're in jail, and help them get acclimated once they get out. A capacity for mutual aid and support for victims, and a capacity to defend them must be made priority. Existing community defense groups and anti-fascist groups should make this kind of action another priority. Men especially need to be violently against this kind of behavior. A man caught sneaking pills into women's drinks shouldn't end the night with teeth in his mouth. A man who would hit a woman with a brick for rejecting his advances shouldn't be allowed to exist in the community peacefully, ever. The thing with politics is that people often wait for someone else within the system to make some kind of change, and as an anarchist I despise that impulse. Political action must be taken by the people themselves, which means you. You can form community groups that can take action against this kind of behavior. You can build mutual aid structures that can care for victims of this kind of harassment and create safer communities. You can partner with other credible established organizations to pool resources, cover bases, and commit to larger actions. You can commit to supporting already existing organizations. There are groups like Trans Defense Fund that work to provide both tools for self-defense and training and are at the front lines of this kind of struggle. And rather than being caught up in circular, repetitive online discourse, we should work to find and uplift this in similar organizations or create them where needed to deal with the problem materially. At the end of all this, I truly believe that violence against these kinds of men and active arming and politicization of all subjected to patriarchal violence is an essential solution. Make no mistake, men who do these kinds of things, harassing women, committing serial acts of abuse, they're fascists. Misogyny is a fascist tendency. Misogynistic violence is a fascistic violence. There is little distinction. The politics expressed by misogynistic actions are fascistic politics, a politic of control and domination. It is the expression of a belief in total dehumanization, lack of right to boundaries, and the right of men to have sexual access to women. These acts must be met by us in the same manner as fascism. Total, unrelenting antipathy. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you would like to support me as I make more content like this, you can go on Patreon and support me directly via the different tiers there. You get access to things like behind the scenes content, early access to videos that are unreleased on the channel, scripts, writings that don't get turned into actual fully fledged videos, their short stories, whatever. So check that out if you want to support this channel directly. There are a lot of times where Patreon has been the only stable source of income that I have, so I really want to say thank you to everyone supporting the channel that way, and also through one-time donations on things like Venmo. Do me a favor and like and subscribe to this video, and especially if you don't mind, take the time to share this with a friend, share it on whatever social media websites you use or whatever communities it's appropriate in, or whoever you think it would be useful for. And thank you.